Hello everyone, this is Alan G., your host on History's Dark Chronicles on YouTube. If you watch our videos, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you'll be notified of any future episodes. On June 18, 1865, the bodies of two children, Isabella and John Joyce, were discovered in a forested area known as Bussey's Woods near Roxbury, Massachusetts, outside of Boston. Raped and savaged with dozens of knife wounds, poor Isabella had been slaughtered among the trees. John was found a short distance away, beaten and stabbed nearly a dozen times himself. The murders would have gone unsolved if the same killer did not strike again for 7 years. On Monday, June 12, 1865, 15-year-old Isabella Joyce and her 12-year-old brother John, children of a recently widowed seamstress who lived in Lynn, Massachusetts, went to visit their grandmother in Roxbury, a neighborhood of Boston. At around 11 a.m., they asked for permission to go to and explore a nearby wooded area called May's Woods, which was popular locally as a picnic spot and recreation ground. After some initial reluctance, their grandmother agreed to let them go. She packed them a lunch, gave them 10 cents each for trolley fare, and told them to return no later than 2 p.m. She never saw them alive again. When the children did not return, their grandmother became frantic. For the next 5 days, search parties scoured the forest outside town. It wasn't until Sunday, June 18th, however, that two men, John Sawtell and J.F. Jameson, while hiking in nearby Bussey's Woods, not May's Woods where the children said they planned to go, stumbled across the remains of the two children. From the scene, it seemed clear that Isabella and her brother had been playing contentedly in the woods, creating little hillocks of moss and fashioning wreaths out of oak leaves and twigs, when they were unexpectedly attacked. The assailant, which the newspapers called a fiend in human shape, attacked the girl first, cutting her savagely with a knife, tearing off her undergarments, and abusing her. The coroner found 27 stab wounds in her torso and another 16 in her neck. The ground around her body was saturated with blood. She had apparently put up a desperate fight, grabbing the long blade of the knife and trying to wrest it from the attacker's hands. The index finger of her right hand was completely severed, and the rest of her fingers were mangled, bloody, and hanging loosely by bits of skin. Her clothing was soaked in her blood, and clumps of grass and dirt had been roughly shoved in her mouth to try and stifle her cries. Apparently, poor John had stood paralyzed for a few moments in terror, watching the attack on his sister. When he finally turned to run, it was too late. He was found lying face down in the dirt, possibly having tripped over a tree root when he was attempting to escape. The killer had pounced on the boy's back and stabbed him half a dozen times. The wounds were so deep that in several instances, the blade had gone all the way through the young boy's body and pierced the earth beneath him. There were two houses within a few hundred yards of the murder scene, but the occupants were so used to hearing shouts, laughter, and yells from the nearby picnic area that, as the newspapers noted, they would not have paid attention even if they heard screams on this occasion. The horrific savagery of the Joyce murders provoked a tremendous response throughout the state. From church pulpits, ministers pointed to the murders as a sign that the country was descending into a deplorable state of vice, immorality, and crime. Rewards totaling more than $4,500, more than $60,000 in today's money, were offered by the local residents, while an enormous manhunt was started for the inhuman wretch that was responsible for the outrage. Newspapers issued confident predictions that the perpetrator would be speedily arrested and subjected to summary vengeance. But even though a number of likely suspects were interrogated in the wake of the murders, no serious suspects were found. As months, then years, passed with no arrests in the case, It seemed that the murder of the Joyce children, which newspapers called one of the most horrible and revolting crimes which has ever occurred in New England, would remain forever unsolved. Time moved on, and for the most part, the murders were sadly forgotten. But in the early summer of 1872, 7 years after Isabella and John Joyce had been brutally slain, a new string of events was set into motion when Franklin Evans came to board with his elderly sister, Mrs. Deborah Day, at her farmhouse in Northwood, New Hampshire. Evans, a gaunt and grizzled 64-year-old ne'er-do-well, had led a shiftless existence for most of his adult life. A contemporary writer later said of him, he belonged to that numerous class of deadbeats that are always broke. Wandering the New England countryside, he survived by sponging off his adult children, borrowing small amounts of money from relatives and acquaintances, and blatantly seeking handouts from strangers. Evans had been born in Stratford, New Hampshire in 1807, and from his youth he led a roving and miserable life according to the New York Herald. He lived in a number of places in New Hampshire, often sponging off relatives: Manchester, Concord, Allentown, Derry, Salem, and Candia. Evans also roamed through Massachusetts, Maine, and Canada. He committed his final atrocity, the one that got him caught, in Northwood. He was of medium height with a slim build, and he had sharp features, a thin face, and dark piercing eyes. A newspaper reporter wrote that a shrewd observer could detect him as cunning, shrewd, and unprincipled. In 1832, he married a Stratford woman, apparently a widow, Mrs. Hannah Peavy. The union lasted until her death, and they had a son and a daughter. According to the New York Herald, he pretended to read medicine with Dr. Hanson of Manchester, and calling himself a botanic physician. He practices such more or less among ignorant people. Once he roamed the country with an electrical battery, which he pretended to use professionally, and again he went around giving exhibitions with a magic lantern. He also did odd jobs along the way to support himself. He married a second time, but that wife left him. So did a third. He was living in Salem with his second wife, left him in the fall of 1850. Shortly afterward, on October 30th, a kidnapper snatched a 5-year-old daughter of Stephen Mills from her home in Derry. Her parents had left the child alone. Her body was never found. Evans later confessed to the crime. Passing by the Mills house, he said he saw a little girl playing on the floor. Possessed of the urge to procure a body to examine for surgical purposes, he climbed through the window and grabbed the child. Evans then carried her in the woods where he strangled her. But when he took off her clothes, he saw she had a deformed hip and spine. Repelled, he decided not to abuse and mutilate her body. Instead, he buried her under a rotted chestnut stump. As a quack botanical physician, he spent a lot of time in the woods hunting for medicinal herbs and, apparently, hiding bodies. 3 years later, he was skulking in the woods near Augusta, Maine. A 14-year-old girl named Anna Sibley had the misfortune to walk by him on the way to school. He grabbed her, carried her deeper into the forest, abused her, cut her throat, and hid her body under a pile of leaves. Fast forward a decade to 1862. Evans adopted a sanctimonious look and styled himself an Adventist preacher. He had the gift of gab, and for a while he was able to take advantage of the religious ardor of the day, but he tended to get caught out. The New York Herald reported he once attended an Adventist meeting in Boston in the garb of a hypocrite. He appealed successfully to the sympathies of the audience, who raised him a good contribution, the newspaper reported. The next day, he spent most of it for a meerschaum pipe, and his religious friends, hearing of it, would never have anything more to do with him. After raising money for his mission, he used it to visit prostitutes. His arrest forced him to move on. In 1862, he went to preach in Augusta, Maine. He visited the home of an Adventist family, the Libbys, in the nearby town of Strong. One Sunday morning, 9-year-old Laura Libby left the house to walk to church. She never made it. On Monday, the townspeople organized a search for the girl. Late that day, they discovered a shallow grave near the Libby farmhouse. They uncovered Laura's naked, mutilated body. Her killer had abused her and slashed her throat, nearly decapitating her. An Irish farmhand named Lawrence Doyle was suspected of the murder. He said he didn't do it. Though prosecutors had only flimsy evidence, a jury found him guilty. He died in prison 6 years later, all the while claiming they got the wrong man. His lawyers thought so too. Later, when Evans awaited execution for murder, Doyle's lawyer connected him to the killing of Laura Libby. With little honest money he made come from supplying a Manchester physician, Dr. F.W. Hansen, with healing roots and herbs that he scrounged up in the forest, his vagabond life had given the old man a deep knowledge of the land, and his reputation for obtaining medicinal products of the woods and fields was unsurpassed. Even in this line of work, though, Evans could not keep from betraying his lazy and dishonest nature. Claiming that he himself was a botanical physician, he peddled worthless cures to rural families. He also passed himself off as an itinerant preacher, taking advantage of the religious fervor of the era. He joined the Second Advent Society, declared that he was a minister of the gospel, and managed to raise a little money from his brethren to support himself while on his sacred mission. The religious society naturally took offense, however, when he was arrested for consorting with prostitutes. And this incident wasn't his only brush with the law. At various times he was charged with petty theft, attempting to pass crudely forged $10 bills, and most seriously, scheming to defraud the Travelers Insurance Company of Boston of $1,500. If these crimes were the worst of his transgressions, Evans would have been nothing more than a small-time scoundrel, a snake oil salesman, and a con artist. But as the country would eventually learn, much to its horror, he was something far worse, a creature so depraved that to the people of the time, his crimes seemed the work of a supernatural evil. Too horrible, as one newspaper stated, for anything in human form to have perpetrated. There were 4 people living at his sister's farm when Evans showed up there that summer. Mrs. Day and her husband Sylvester, their widowed daughter, Susan Lovering, and Susan's daughter, Georgiana. This poor young woman, Evans's grandniece, immediately became the object of the depraved old man's lust. Within days of his arrival, he began trying to seduce the girl. When she repulsed his advances, he concocted a diabolical scheme. It was, as one account stated, a deeply laid plan designed for no other purpose than to lure his victim into his lecherous grasp. Near the Day farmhouse was a deep forest, the largest tract of woodland in the county, covering an area of more than 2,000 acres. Late on Monday, October 21st, 1872, after being away from the farm for most of the day, Evans returned to his sister's home, explaining that he had been off in the forest setting snares for partridges. The following morning, he invited his niece to accompany him into the woods to see if it caught anything. For reasons unknown, she agreed. The traps turned out to be empty, but he showed Georgiana how they worked. Little hoops concealed inside the hedges, designed to snag birds by the throat as they scrambled through the foliage. Georgiana was intrigued by the snares, never suspecting that their purpose was actually to trap her. Early Friday morning, October 25th, Evans asked the young woman for a favor. She had agreed to take care of some chores for a neighbor, a farmer named Daniel Hill, and would be gone all day. He asked Georgiana if she would mind going into the woods and check the partridge traps for him. Surely, he must have caught something by now. She was reluctant at first, but allowed herself to be persuaded. Evans left soon afterward, presumably for Hill's farm several miles away. A short time later, Georgiana stuck a comb into her thick brown hair to hold it in place, threw on a shawl, and disappeared into the forest. When Georgiana failed to return by lunchtime, her grandfather went to look for her. Unable to find any sign of her, he came back home and told her mother, who immediately became alarmed. The two of them hurried back into the woods. As they frantically made their way along the forest paths, they spotted her shawl on a tree branch. A short distance away, they discovered her comb, broken in half, with strands of her hair still tangled in its teeth. The earth all around had been trampled with footprints, one made by a man's boots, the other by a girl's shoes. Evidence. Sylvester Day would later testify of a squabble. Terrified now, Day and his daughter pushed deeper into the trees, but found no other signs of the missing girl. The two of them ran home, alerting the neighbors as they went. Throughout the weekend, all day on Saturday and Sunday, hundreds of people scoured the woods but found nothing. By then, however, suspicion had fallen on Franklin Evans. The authorities checked with Daniel Hill and found that Evans' story just didn't add up. He had not asked him to help with chores that day. In fact, he hadn't seen him for more than a week. Another witness, a young man named James Pender, testified that he had seen Evans cross into the forest at around 8:30 a.m. on Friday morning, just half an hour before Georgiana had disappeared into those same woods. County Sheriff Henry Drew grilled Evans, but the old man could offer no convincing account of his whereabouts on the day that his grandniece went missing. He was promptly taken into custody. Inside Evans's pockets, Drew later stated, he found a wallet, money, obscene books, a bottle of liquor, and a common bone-handled knife with two blades, blood-stained and keen as a razor. Even after he was arrested, Evans denied knowing anything about what happened to Georgiana. But then Drew assured him that no harm would come to him if he confessed. Evans changed his story. Georgiana, he insisted, was alive and well. He arranged to have her carried away by a man from Kingston, a farmer named Webster, who wanted her for his bride and was willing to pay for her. Although Sheriff Drew was skeptical, he immediately started for Kingston, where he quickly confirmed the story was a base falsehood. Back at the jailhouse, he continued to badger Evans, plying him with liquor and even telling him that he would help him escape to Canada if he told him the truth. Finally, on October 31st, 6 days after the girl's disappearance, the old man gave in. Evans told the sheriff he would accompany him to the place where the body had been left. Through the dark forest, they silently made their way along over rocks and logs and along narrow trails. Then, in a clearing at one of the deepest points of the woods, Evans took the sheriff and an assembled group of deputies to a spot underneath the roots of an upturned tree. He pointed a shaking finger at a pile of dried leaves and quietly murmured, "There she is." The sheriff gently brushed away the leaves, and by the dim light of his lantern, he saw the pale face and mangled remains of Georgiana Lovering. Two townsmen were at the scene. Eben J. Parsley and Alonzo Tuttle had brought the local physician, Dr. Caleb Hansen, with them. Gaping in shock at the body of the naked, savage girl, Parsley couldn't help but speak. He demanded of Evans, "How did you come to do such a bloody deed?" The old man shrugged as he replied, "I suppose the evil one got the upper hand of me." Dr. Hansen bent down to examine the girl. A glance at her face, with its bulging eyes swollen and protruding, and dark bruises at her throat, told him that she had been strangled. Her body had been hideously mutilated. Evans later confessed that he had raped her corpse and then had torn open her belly with his bone-handled knife to get to her uterus. He had also excised her vulva, which he carried away with him and hid under a rock. When a stunned Sheriff Drew asked him why he had committed such butchery, the old man calmly replied that he did it to gain some knowledge of the human system that might be of use to me as a doctor. As he was dragging the man back to jail, Drew had one more question for him. "What did you set those snares for, Frank?" Evans answered with a self-satisfied smirk, "I set them to catch the girl, and I catched her." Franklin Evans's trial opened on February 3rd, 1873. But it was a perfunctory affair. The outcome was a foregone conclusion to everyone involved, including the defendant. Only one dramatic moment occurred during its 3-day duration. Early on the morning of Tuesday, February 5th, while his guard was off fetching him a glass of water, Evans took one of his suspenders, tied it around his neck, attached the other end to a clothes hook on the wall of his cell, and tried to hang himself. Just then, the newspapers reported the guard returned, seized Evans, and disengaged him from the hook. Most observers believed that the man's half-hearted suicide attempt was nothing more than a ploy to set up an insanity defense. If that was the case, the effort failed. He was convicted of murder in the first degree and sentenced to hang on February 17, 1874. For his unnameable and incredible crimes, he will be swung like a dog, celebrated one local newspaper, which went on to recommend that those wishing to attend the hanging should make early application in order to secure reserved seats, which will be scarce. Accompanied by the High Sheriff of Rockingham County, J.W. Odlin, Evans was transported by train to the state prison at Concord. A crowd of more than 800 people gathered at the station to get a glimpse of him. One newspaper stated that they were excited to a remarkable pitch of feeling. This frenzied fascination was not entirely based on Evans's notoriety as the killer of Georgiana Lovering. By then, he had confessed to other crimes as well, atrocities that marked him as one of the most appalling killers of the era. Franklin Evans spent the last night of his life quietly, falling asleep around midnight with the Reverend Church of Providence, Rhode Island, at his side. Around 5:30 a.m., he ate a hearty breakfast and drank a cup of tea. When Church asked him if he had any last-minute statements to make, he replied, "I have confessed everything. If the people don't believe it, I can't help it." A large, excited crowd gathered outside the prison walls as the hour of execution drew near. At 10:15 a.m., they were admitted into the building where the gallows had been set up in the corridor between the guardroom and the cells. Within minutes, every available space was packed with spectators, some of them standing on the stairways leading up to the cells, others crowded around the scaffold. At 11 a.m., Evans, dressed in a black suit, was led through the crowd by the prison warden. He climbed the scaffold on his own and muttered something under his breath as his arms and legs were tied. He appeared quite calm and possessed, although the people who were standing closest to the gallows later reported that his knees were trembling. The noose was adjusted around his neck and a black hood was pulled over his head. After reading the death warrant, Sheriff Odlin placed his foot on the spring that controlled the drop, and at exactly 11:06 a.m. on Tuesday, February 17, 1874, the elderly serial killer was launched into eternity. He dangled in the air, slowly strangling, for nearly 20 minutes before his heart stopped beating and the attendant physician declared him dead. Ironically, since he claimed that his murders were committed so that he could gain anatomical knowledge to aid him as a doctor, his corpse was donated to the Dartmouth Medical College so that it could be dissected by the students there. According to later sources, quote, "In the weeks approaching his execution, Evans started having vivid dreams and visions, which some newspapers believed might be related to the murders. While sitting on death row, he appeared to be in relatively high spirits, believing he would have his sentence commuted or even be pardoned. In a conversation with the sheriff stationed in the prison, he expressed that his only true regret was his ignorance of his call to preach the Millerite doctrine, and that if he had, he would be an honored member of that society. In addition, he professed his belief that he was one of the chosen few whose sins would be turned into virtues upon death." End quote. We'd like to thank you for watching this week, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully we'll have some more consistency when it comes to the episodes. If you like what you see, hit like, hit subscribe, and then hit the bell so you'll be notified of any future episodes. If you'd like to contribute to the channel, we're on Buy Me a Cup of Coffee. Of course, we're on Venmo. Notify me if you want to send me an email to let me know if you would like that address. And we'll see you next time. Until next time.